want to thank you. If politicians supported efforts like this the way you have, it'd be smooth sailing. We'd be done next week. Okay, let's talk about my idea of nature's best hope. But before we do that, poor E.O. Wilson's head is off the chart there.
Oh no.
Yeah. Well, while we're, that's good enough. You remember what it looks like. Whoa. He did die the day after Christmas, so it's a terrible loss to conservation. There's 2 dials on there.
Yeah.
No. Career, he was 92, and he wrote every single day. He published a book every year for a long time. And one thing that was consistent throughout his very long career was his effort to save life on planet Earth. He loved biodiversity, he knew that we needed it, and he spent a lot of time trying to convince us of that. And in 2016, he wrote this book, Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight for Life, and his message was very, very clear. He said, in order to save life anywhere on planet Earth, we're going to have to save nature. We're going to have to save functioning ecosystems on at least half of the planet. And he spent most of the book talking about the science that supports that statement. And then he ended the book. He didn't spend a lot of time talking about how we could actually do that. Of course, to a conservation biologist, this is good news. We'll just put half the planet aside and we can all enjoy a lot of nature. The problem is half of terrestrial Earth is already in some form of agriculture. And there's almost 8 billion people in the other half, along with all of our roads and our highways and airports and detritus. And we don't have a third half to put aside for nature. So we're wondering how we can possibly do that. I think the farther back you go, the bigger it gets. You want to go forward. There we go. This is an exercise in making focus on what we're talking about. I think we can realize E.O.'s dream. We can save nature on half of planet Earth, but in order to do that, we need a new approach to conservation. And that's what I want to talk about tonight. But before I do that, I want to talk about what happened in 2019. We have what we call an oak mast, where members of the Red Oak group got together and decided to make their acorns at the same time. And that's what it looked like in a lot of places. I'm easily entertained. So I took one of those acorns, and I just stared at it. And I was rewarded because an insect started to chew its way out of the acorn. First it chewed a hole for its head, then of course its little head through there, then of course its entire body through that hole. It was a tight squeeze. Boom, down. Very dangerous time for this insect larva because it's good to eat. A lot of things are after it. So it gets to safety by wiggling and squirming beneath the soil surface in about 30 seconds. And once it's underground, it stretches in all directions and forms a chamber. And within that chamber, converts itself to a pupa. And then it stays there for 2 years. And then it comes out as an acorn weevil. That's what an acorn weevil looks like. A lot of people think weevils have big noses, because it looks like they do, but that's actually a capsule. And the mouth parts are way down there at the end of that extension. They take those mouth parts and chew a hole into the center of the acorn, turn around, lay an egg in it, and that's how the larva gets down there. Well, why do they spend 2 years underground when they come out the next year in wood? It takes tiny little ants where the entire colony lives in the holes made by acorn weevils after they've left the acorn. And if scouts find a new hole, they get all excited because their old acorn is falling apart. So they got to find a new house. They tell everybody it's time to move. They grab the larvae, they grab the eggs, they move the entire colony into the new acorn in about 30 minutes. Then they post a guard, make sure nobody else comes in. And that's where they'll live for the next 2 years until that acorn falls apart. What's my point with this little story? That's just one of literally millions of very specialized interactions between animals and nature. That's another one, the relationship between jays and acorn. There's the primary species of acorn. You'll see an acorn plant about a mile from the tree, the plant tree, and they tap it below the surface of the soil. The oxygen is only a very many times as something to eat. As the oak remember where one is. So for every 4 acorns they bury, they have planted 3 oak trees. Specialized interaction between pileated woodpeckers and carpenter ants. That's what they rear their young on, carpenter ants. So you won't have pileated woodpeckers unless you have a lot of carpenter ants, and you won't have a lot of carpenter ants unless you have the big trees that make those carpenter ants. You won't have this bee, Andrena facilii, unless you have facilia. That is the only pollen, the only plant that bee can use to reproduce on. And it turns out that pollen specialization is very common in our native bees. We have almost 4,000 species of native bees, and almost a third of them can only reproduce on the pollen of particular plants. You won't have the Baltimore checker sparrow unless you have a turtlehead. I can talk all night, all week, all year about nature's specialized interactions. The point I want to make tonight, though, is that these specialized interactions, nature itself, is on the ropes now. And it's on the ropes because we did not take Teddy Roosevelt's advice. Way back in 1908, Teddy heard that the state of Arizona was going to mine the Grand Canyon. So he went to the canyon, looked out over the edge, and he said, "Leave it as it is." And with those 5 words, he started the process of creating the Grand Canyon National Park. Well, we didn't leave it as it was. There's only about 5% of the lower 48 states that's anything close to its original pristine ecological state. And those are typically mountaintops. And that's because we've logged the country repeatedly. We have tilled it, we have drained it, we have grazed it. We've got 770 million acres of rangeland in this country. That's 4.5 times the size of Texas, dedicated to cattle. And of course, we've paved it or otherwise developed it. We have straightened our rivers and dammed them, and you can spell that any way you want. We have polluted our skies and changed our climate for centuries to come. We have drained our aquifers. We've introduced more than 3,300 species of plants from other continents, many of which are running amok in our natural areas. In short, we've carved up those natural areas into tiny remnants of their former selves. And each one of those remnants is too small and too isolated to sustain the amount of nature that we humans need in order to produce the amount of ecosystem services that keep us alive. So you might wonder why we've done this. I wonder why we've done this, and I don't know. But I suspect we thought that the Earth, our nest, was so big we could foul it forever and there wouldn't be any consequences. But of course, we were wrong about that, and that's why we're seeing some pretty scary headlines these days, like the insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Talking about global insect decline. Followed by this one, North America's lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. That's almost a third of our North American bird population. Already gone. Now the UN says we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction probably in the next 20 years. Makes a nice headline, but it's not an option, folks. Those are the species that keep us alive here. We've got to make sure that does not happen. So I could go on talking about the pox that we humans have delivered upon the environment, thus upon all of our houses. But that's not what this talk is about. This talk's about a cure for that pox. It's a cure that will take small efforts from lots of people like you and me, but those efforts will deliver enormous physical, psychological, and environmental benefits to everybody. Let's return briefly to this headline. The insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Well, back to E.O. Wilson. He told us what it would mean if we lost insects on planet Earth, and he did it way back in 1987 with this paper, The Little Things That Run the World. And again, his message was very clear. Life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, so would most of our flowering plants. And if most of our flowering plants disappeared, that would so drastically change energy flow through our terrestrial ecosystems that the food webs that support our animals, our amphibians, our reptiles, our birds, our mammals, even many of our freshwater fishes, those food webs would collapse and those animals would all disappear. The biosphere, the living portion of the Earth, would rot because we would have lost insect decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients, and all we would have is fungi and bacteria. And of course, humans wouldn't survive any of those drastic changes. There is some good news, finally, and that is that none of that has to happen. We can save our insects, we can save our birds, we can save nature itself, but we're going to have to change the way we landscape in order to do it. Why is that? Well, remember, humans are products of nature. We are totally dependent on the life support that healthy ecosystems provide. We call them ecosystem services. Here are a few things that plants do, like produce oxygen, pretty important. Clean our water, slow its journey to the sea where it becomes too salty to use. Carbon capture, they're pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, building their tissues out of that carbon, and then, even more important, pumping the extra carbon through their roots into the ground for long-term storage. And by long-term storage, I mean thousands of years. Plants build topsoil, hold it in place, they prevent floods, they dampen severe weather, they convert sunlight into food. If we lose our plants, we're going to have to eat sunlight, and that will be hard. What do animals do for plants? They provide pest control services. They pollinate nearly 90% of our flowering plants. They disperse plant seeds. So designing landscapes like this that destroy the production of ecosystem services is just not a good idea. Never was a good idea, but today it's a terrible idea because we need more ecosystem services today than ever before because we've got more people demanding them. And we're taking them, but every time we do that, we're taking them from something else on this planet, which we also need to keep us alive. So it's a downward spiral. Now we do have parks and we've got preserves, and they're doing the best they can, but it's not good enough. And that's why we're now in the 6th great extinction that the planet has ever witnessed. Which means, in order to turn that around, we're going to have to start practicing conservation outside of parks and preserves, on pieces of land just like that. Now, there have been visionaries through the ages who have recognized that we humans needed to work on our relationship with planet Earth, and Aldo Leopold was one of the most eloquent. He wrote extensively in the first half of the 1900s. One of the things he said is the oldest task in human history is to live in a piece of land without spoiling it. There have been indigenous groups that have been able to do that for long periods, but our huge Western societies and our huge Asian societies are terrible at doing that. We habitually take more from the earth than it has to offer, completely wrecking an area, going to another area doing the same thing, not sustainable behavior. But Aldo Leopold had a lot of faith in humans. He believed we could develop what he called a land ethic. He knew we had to use the land. We had to farm and lumber and graze and mine and do all of those things. But he believed we could learn to do them gently enough that we did not destroy local ecosystems. That's what he called the land ethic, and he wrote about it in the Sand County Almanac, his most famous book. What he did not write about, though, was developing a land ethic where we actually lived. And I'm not sure why that was, but I suspect the notion that humans and nature cannot coexist in the same place at the same time. That notion was so deeply embedded in the culture of Aldo Leopold's day, still embedded in our own culture, that he may not have recognized it as an option. But what I want to argue this evening is that not only is living with nature an option, it's now the only viable option that's left to us. In the past, of course, conservationists worked pretty much exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. We now need to turn that on its head. We need to practice conservation where there are a lot of people, because that's pretty much everywhere. In other words, we've got to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes. Not hang on by a thread, not be reduced every single year, but thrive. Where should we start? Well, let's go back to private property. You know, most of the country is privately owned. 78% of the country is privately owned. 85.6% of the U.S. east of the Mississippi is privately owned. If we don't practice conservation on private property, we're going to fail, because we'll be working in areas that are too small, too isolated, and there's a third thing there too. And too few. There's too few of them. I'm getting old, folks. I'm sorry. Okay, when I talk about conservation, I'm not using the word correctly. We do want to conserve any bits of nature that are left. So I hear about, 200 acres here. Got to save those. They're vital. They're the refuges where nature is hiding right now. But I'm really talking about putting it back together where we've already taken it away. I'm talking about restoration. And before you tell me you cannot put it back exactly the way it was before we dismantled it, I know that. But it doesn't mean we can't reunite enough of those specialized interactions to create functional ecosystems again, even if it's not exactly what was there beforehand. But in order to do that, we have to start with the building blocks of ecosystems. Not all species contribute to ecosystem function equally, so we have to start with the groups that are the most powerful. We can add the other groups later on. And there's two groups we can't do without. One of them is the flowering plants and the pollinators that allow those plants to reproduce. They're capturing the energy from the sun and through photosynthesis turning it into food and then storing that food in their plant parts. That is the food that supports all the animal life on terrestrial Earth. So now the food is stored in plant parts. If you don't give that to animals, you don't have any animals. Well, most vertebrates don't eat plants directly. Most vertebrates eat an invertebrate that ate the plant. That typically is an insect, and not just any insect. It turns out that caterpillars are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater, all over the planet. So if we design landscapes that don't have a lot of caterpillars in them, we've got failed food webs and eventually failed ecosystems. Let's use the Carolina chickadee as an example. That is the chickadee that's at our feeders around here all winter long, eating seeds. So we tend to think that's what chickadees need. We put out seeds and we've met their needs. Well, during the wintertime, 50% of their diet is seeds. The other 50% is insects and spiders, even in the wintertime. And when it comes time to reproduce, their babies can't eat seeds. And that's true for most of the birds that are out there. They cannot rear their young on seeds. So they switch to insects, and if they're in a healthy environment, they will rear their young exclusively on caterpillars. And they're not exceptions. 96% of our terrestrial birds are rearing their young on insects, and most of those insects are caterpillars. How do I know that? Well, there's a number of lines of evidence that suggest that, but this is a citizen science project that one of my students, Ashley Kennedy, did a few years ago. She put out a call to bird photographers around the country, and she said, please take pictures of birds during the breeding season when they're carrying prey items to the nest. Then send those pictures to me, Ashley. I will identify what's in the beaks of these birds and reconstruct the nestling diet for as many species of birds as I can in North America. And it was a big success. She got thousands of pictures. You're looking at a summary of her results, the 20 most common bird families in the U.S. The green bars are the percentage of those nestling diets in those 20 most common bird families that were caterpillars. And in 16 of the 20 common bird families, caterpillars dominated the diet. So again, what would happen to our breeding birds if we designed landscapes that don't have enough caterpillars? Most of the birds would not be able to reproduce. So there's something special about caterpillars. What is it? There's actually several things special about caterpillars, and one of them is that they are soft. Think of this guy as if he's a little sausage with a very thin wrapper. The thin wrapper is his exoskeleton. It's made of chitin. It's undigestible, and birds don't want a lot of that. And because caterpillars are soft, you can stuff them down the throat of your offspring without fear of injuring them. If you've ever watched a parent bird rear their young, they're pretty rough. It beaks like a plunger. Caterpillars are also relatively large prey items. One medium-sized caterpillar is equal to the biomass of 200 aphids. So some of our smaller birds do chase aphids around. If you want to chase 200 aphids, you get one caterpillar. They're nutritious. They're very high in fat, very high in protein, low percentage of chitin, of exoskeleton compared to most other insects, particularly beetles. Beetles are not like little sausages. They're like little tanks. So much of a beetle is undigestible. And a lot of beetles have really sharp edges, too, so you don't want to stuff them down the throat of your babies. And finally, it turns out that caterpillars are the best source of carotenoids for birds during the breeding season. Now, I mentioned carotenoids not because I love organic chemistry, but because I'm a vertebrate, and you're a vertebrate, and birds are vertebrates. And we vertebrates cannot make our own carotenoids. Only plants make carotenoids. So we have to get our carotenoids from plants. And we have to get them from plants because carotenoids are essential components of vertebrate diets. Where are the birds getting their carotenoids from? From what they eat, of course. But look, carotenoid content in bird prey is not equal. These first two bars here are types of caterpillars, and they have far more carotenoids than other types of insects. Here, the adult caterpillars here, the moths and the butterflies themselves, they have far fewer carotenoids because they're not eating the green leaves. It's the caterpillars that eat the green leaves. And finally, here's the earthworm over here. So the early bird gets the worm, but he doesn't get any carotenoids when he gets the worm. So that study and several others are suggesting that caterpillars are not optional parts of bird diets. They're essential parts of bird diets. So let's just say birds need caterpillars. Okay, the next question is, how many do they need? Is one or two enough? Or one or two a day enough? That's a good question. Let's go back to chickadees. There are a lot of data on chickadees. How many caterpillars does it take to make a nest of chickadees? One or two is not enough. One or two a day is not enough. It takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars, depending on the number of chicks in the nest, to get them to the point where they leave the nest. And after they leave the nest, after they fledge, the parents continue to feed them caterpillars another 21 days. So you're talking about tens of thousands of caterpillars to make one clutch of a bird that's a third of an ounce. That's 3 pennies worth of bird. And if you want birds, you want chickadees to breed in your yard, and I would think you do because in so many places that's all we have left, you have to have all those caterpillars in your yard because chickadees are foraging about 50 meters from the nest. They're not flying 5 miles down the road to the nearest woodlot. And if we landscape in a way that does not make all of those insects, that's called insect decline. And it's really looking like insect decline is one of the major causes of the bird declines that people are measuring. This is data from Rosenberg et al. They're down there on the bottom on the stage. That is the Smithsonian group that said we've lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. What we did was divide up the terrestrial bird species into two groups: the species that require insects at some part of their life history, and the species that don't require insects. So things like doves and finches can actually reproduce on seeds. They make a little milk out of seeds and feed that to their young. And look, they didn't lose any numbers at all in the last 50 years. But the birds that require insects at some part of their life history lost on average 10 million individuals per species. So it doesn't prove cause and effect, but it certainly does suggest that as you take away bird food, you lose the birds. So we need to add a new goal to our landscape designs. In the past, we've had one goal, and that is to make them pretty. So we're not going to give that up. We're still going to have pretty landscapes, but now they're going to be ecologically functional too, which means they have to make insects, particularly caterpillars. So how do we add caterpillars to landscapes? We do that by adding the plants that support caterpillars. That seems pretty straightforward, but there is a catch, and that is most plants don't support a lot of caterpillars. So we have to be fussy about it. We have to use the plants that do support a lot of caterpillars, and we have to be fussy about it because the caterpillars themselves are very fussy about it. The monarch butterfly illustrates it perfectly. You can have all the crepe myrtle, and all the calorie pear, and all the burning bush, and all the boxwood, and all the hosta, and all the things we typically landscape with from Asia in your yard, and you won't make a single monarch butterfly. The only thing that's going to make a monarch butterfly is one of the milkweed species. That's called host plant specialization, and it turns out that most of the insects that eat plants are host plant specialists, just like Mr. Monarch. Why is that? Because the plants have made them specialized. Plants don't want to be eaten. They want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction, so they've loaded their tissues with nasty tasting chemicals. Secondary metabolic compounds that make those tissues either bitter or downright toxic. And if you don't believe me, when you're walking out, if you can find a plant, eat it. See if you like it. You can set your alarm and then eat it. You know what? You're not going to like it. It's a really effective defense. It keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world, and that's why it's green out there. It's not because there's no insects out there that want to eat those plants. It's because most of the insects that are out there cannot eat most of the plants. They are too well protected. But we do know that insects eat plants. So how do they do that? How do they get around those chemical defenses? Well, this is where the specialization comes in. 90% of the insects that eat plants, 90% are specialized just like the monarch butterfly. Every plant lineage that's out there protects itself with a unique cocktail of chemical defenses, and an insect cannot adapt to all of them. So I picked one or two plant lineages that are really similar in how they protect themselves, and they develop the specialized adaptations that allow them to get around those defenses. Specialized enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify those compounds. Specialized behavioral adaptations and life history adaptations that minimize the insect's exposure to those compounds. It takes a long period of exposure to those plants for all those adaptations to fall into place, and once they do, the insect is locked into eating those particular plants. So if you take the milkweeds out of your yard and put in hostas, the monarch butterfly is not going to start to make a living on the hostas. Can't do it. It's locked into milkweeds, and it has two choices. Either fly away and find milkweed someplace else, if it can, or starve to death. And this is why when we bring in plants from other continents to landscape with, not only are we wrecking the food web where we use those plants, because our insects are not adapted to eating them, but also many of those plants have escaped and become serious invasive species in our natural areas. Just walk around a natural area, if you can identify the plants, you'll see that many of them are escapees from our garden. There are three kinds of plants, and it's very helpful if we can learn to recognize each one. There are those that contribute energy to local food webs. We'll just call them contributors. There are those that do not contribute energy to local food webs. And then there are those that actively wreck local food webs. A contributor, I've got an oak picture here because they're contributing more energy than any other plant genus in this country. A non-contributor, let's use a ginkgo. There's lots of examples. They're not supporting anything. They're not passing their energy on. They're not invasive. They're not replacing native plants. They're just sitting there. So think of a ginkgo as maybe like a statue. And then, of course, we've got detractors. Those are the invasive species like calorie pear that not only don't support very much, but they also don't stay in our yards. They escape into our natural areas and make the natural areas look like that. And now they're loaded with a plant that's not supporting the local food web. So all I'm trying to say here is that plant choice matters. If we're trying to rebuild food webs to support the life around us, we have to use the right plants or it's not going to work. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of how well it does work when we do choose the right plants, starting with my house right here. This is a house that Cindy and I moved into in the year 2000. It was part of a farm that was broken up into 10-acre lots. Very old farm, but farmed almost 300 years. And the last thing they did was mow it for hay. So there wasn't much there. Our goal was to restore the food web in this house. And to do that, you have to add the caterpillars. So here's some examples. I wanted to see if I could get the Canadian owlet to make a living at our house. So this was early on. I'd never even seen a Canadian owlet. Why did I choose a Canadian owlet? Well, I looked through Dave Wagner's Caterpillars of Eastern North America, and I said, that's a pretty one. Let's see if we can get that in our house. That's what its adult looks like, just like a leaf. Well, Canadian owlets are specialists on meadowroot. We didn't have any meadowroot. No meadowroot anywhere around us. I'm sure it was there hundreds of years ago, but the place really had been farmed to death for an awful long time. So I got some meadowroot seeds from somebody, planted them, grew very nicely. But this was early on, and I actually had very little faith that Canadian owlets would be able to find my little patch of meadowroot. Maybe they had to come from Canada, I don't know. So I didn't even go out and check my meadowroot for a couple months after I planted it. And one day I was walking by for another reason, and I looked over, and here it's covered with Canadian owlets. They had found it right away. I'm still impressed with that. So now we have a good population of meadowroot and Canadian owlets. We've added 2 species to the property. The restoration has started. Same story with the goldenrod stowaway. That's a misnomer. This beautiful orange-yellow moth has nothing to do with goldenrod. It's a specialist on that plant, Bidens aristosa. We didn't have any Bidens aristosa, but I did know where there was some Bidens in a power line cut about 14 miles away. So I got some Biden seeds, planted them at home. They grew very nicely. Had to wait a year for the goldenrod stowaway to find my Bidens, but it did, and now we've got a good population of both of those. So now we've added 4 species to the property. Wanted the Hackberry Emperor, not because it's the most beautiful butterfly in the world, but because it belongs there. It's one of the species that ought to be at our house. Well, as its name suggests, it's a specialist on hackberry, on Celtis. We didn't have any hackberry. So I planted hackberry. Had to wait 4 years for the Hackberry Emperor to come, but they finally did. I looked at one of my Hackberry Emperor, or one of my Celtis branches last June. There were 9 Hackberry Emperor caterpillars on a single branch. So now we've added 6 species, another big success. And that's how it went. I did not plant goldenrod, came in on its own. Along with it came many of the things that require goldenrod, that depend on it, like the beautiful brown-hooded owlet, the Arcidra flower moth, the goldenrod leaf miner, the distinct Sparaginothus, the goldenrod gall moth. Goldenrod supports 110 species of caterpillars where we live. Planted Virginia creeper. Yes, Virginia creeper. I know people don't like Virginia creeper. I just don't know why they don't like it. It's a great native plant. It's got a good fall color. It's a good ground cover. It can climb our trees without girdling them, without pulling them down. It makes valuable berries for the birds in the fall. They're very high in fat. It's a great pollinator plant, believe it or not. Has tiny little inconspicuous flowers. You won't even know it's in bloom, except for that cloud of native bees that's around it. Remember, when you're making a pollinator garden, you're making it for the pollinators. If it's not big and showy for you, that's okay. I planted it because it's the best host plant for the large sphinx moths that are a primary component of cardinal diets. Things like the Pandora sphinx and its beautiful adult, the leonard sphinx, the hog sphinx, the abbot sphinx, all on Virginia creeper. Wanted the evening primrose moth because it's beautiful. I like beauty like anybody else. Well, believe it or not, we had no evening primrose, no Enithera, so I planted that. The moth came, spends the day with its head stuffed in the flowers. It's very cute. And I planted lots of oaks. Now, these are just examples of the plants we put on our property. I want to focus on oaks for a while because they're such important plants. Yeah. That's the Bedford Oak in Bedford, New York, Martha Stewart land. People argue about whether it's 400 years old or 500 years old. It's enormous. And I hear people say, I'm not going to plant an oak because I won't live long enough to enjoy it. And if you can only enjoy your oak when it's 400 years old, you're right, you won't. But if you can enjoy what your oak is contributing to your local food web, and that's what restorations are all about, you can enjoy it right away. And I can say that with confidence because I planted most of my oaks as acorns, which means they were free, or as 2-foot bare root whips, which means they cost $1.50 each. And right away, they started to bring in the moths that create the caterpillars that run the food web at my house. Things like the solitary oak leaf miner, Juvenil's dusky wing, the yellow-shouldered moth, Suzuki's promolactis, the red-washed caterpillar, the yellow-vested moth, the orange-tufted oneida, the spiny oak caterpillar, the two-spotted oak punky, the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the red-humped oakworm, the orange-humped oakworm, the pink-striped oakworm, the hesitant dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the streaked dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the crowned eucalyptus, the orange-patched smoky wing, the white-blotched heterocampa, the oblique heterocampa, the red-line panapoda, the baffer, and literally hundreds more species of moths have found. I'm glad you were clapping for oaks, because they are the very best. They come right away, folks. Look, this is a pin oak that just popped its head above the leaves, and here is a caterpillar standing on the ground eating the leaves of that plant. And people say, oh no, it's going to kill it. No, it's not. No, it's not. It only eats part of it. The tree will be fine. In the meantime, it's supported the food web as soon as it comes up. So you don't have to wait decades or centuries for your oaks to start to contribute. This is what our house looks like, standing in the same place that I took that first picture. Because we put a lot of plants back. You have a little lawn there, we're very traditional. But our research has shown over the years, I didn't know this when we moved in, but we've learned how important caterpillars are. You can count the number of caterpillars in your food web and know how valuable that food web is, how stable it is, how complex it is, just by knowing the number of moth species. So 5 years ago, I made it a challenge to myself. I'm going to take a picture of every species of moth that's now making a living at my house. I'm still at it, but I'm up to 1,140 species of moths. And we've got 10 acres. Pennsylvania is 2.4 million acres. So in 1/240,000th of the land mass, we're supporting 44% of all the moths that occur in the entire state. And because so many of those are species of caterpillars that birds eat, that are bird food, we've recorded 60 species of birds that have bred on our 10 acres. Not flew by, but bred. Why am I telling you this? This is another depressing headline we see all the time. The World Wildlife Fund says that the Earth has lost 2/3 of its wildlife since 1970. Terrible statistic, but I'm thinking, not in our house. I am convinced we have increased biodiversity by more than 2/3, and it didn't take that long, and it wasn't that hard. We just put the plants back. What would happen if we all put the plants back? We could turn headlines around like this all over the world. But I know what you're thinking. We've got 10 acres. A lot of people don't have that much land. Will it work on smaller properties in suburbia? Well, that is a good question. Let's go to Margie and Dan Terpstra's house in Kirkwood, Missouri. They have 0.6 acres, 18 times less land than Cindy and I have. They're in the middle of a development. All their neighbors have the big lawns. When they moved into their property, it was choked with bush honeysuckle, Amur honeysuckle, another invasive plant from Asia. So they got rid of that. They planted 75 species of native plants, put in a water feature, and then they sat back and started to count the birds that are using their yard, and they are up to 149 bird species, including 35 warbler species. Just to put that in perspective, we've only recorded 8 warbler species at our house. So does it work on smaller properties? Absolutely. How about in urban yards, though? Let's go to Pam Carlson's house in Chicago. I mean in Chicago. That tower back there is O'Hare Airport. She's right next to the airport. She has 1/10 of an acre, which is 3 times smaller than the average lot size in North America. It's a pretty 1/10 of an acre because Pam is a landscape designer she only uses native plants. But she did the same thing. She got rid of her invasive plants, her non-native plants, put in 60 species of native plants, a water feature, and then she sat back and started to count the birds that are using your yard. She's up to 124 species that have used her 1/10 of an acre, including a woodcock. There's Pam's woodcock. So if you haven't seen a woodcock lately, go to Chicago, go to Pam's house. All right, there's 4 things we need to think about if we're going to succeed in a big way, and we want to succeed in a big way. And one of the things we need to do is to shrink big lawns. Is this anybody's house? I did take this in Maryland, so if it is, we're just going to use you as a little example. We've got 40 million acres. As of 2005, we had 40 million acres of lawn in North America. That's the size of New England, dedicated to an ecological deadscape. And I know we need lawn because it's a status symbol. It's a remnant of the class system from the aristocracy in Europe. And we also needed to display our Halloween decorations. But what if we cut the area of lawn in half? We're not going to get rid of it. What if we just cut it in half? What if we took areas like this and turned them into Dan Getman's yard? Dan's on the stage over here too. He sent me this picture last year. He said, look, I had a big lawn, I'm planting all these native plants. I'm doing what you say. I said, well, great. It's only the second year of the planting. So that would give us 20 million acres that we could put towards conservation. And if we did that at home, we could create that homegrown national park that you heard about earlier. And it would be a big park. It'll be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, plus Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badland National Park, Olympic National Park, plus Sequoia National Park, plus the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. And if all those parks, still less than 20 million acres. So Homegrown National Park would be the biggest park in the country. What do we get when we put a park at home? What do we get when you put some part of nature where you live? You get the opportunity to develop a relationship with that part of nature. To get to know Mother Nature at your own time, your own pace. All you have to do is go outside. Or all you have to do is look out your window. You can avoid crowds. You know, if you go to a real national park, last year, 375 million people there with you. It's free. There's no admission fee. It's never closed, no matter what pandemic comes down the pipe. No travel hassles. You get to experience the natural world alone, which I think is essential to developing that personal relationship with nature, not mediated by somebody else. And it's particularly important for our poor kids who are suffering from nature deficit disorder, according to Richard Liu. Yep. So we're trying. We get 30 kids. We put them on a bus with a teacher. They drive for an hour. They go to a natural area. They walk around for an hour. Teacher tells them not to touch anything. And then they get back on the bus and they go home. And that's their experience with the natural world, which I'm sure is better than nothing. But it's really been an experience with 30 other kids and a teacher telling them not to touch anything. If they have something living in their yard, all they have to do is go outside and get to know it alone. Make friends with Mother Nature the way they want to. No parental supervision. They will come home again. You know, when we hover over our kids, we're sending the message, this is dangerous. Watch out. We're scaring them without saying a word. This is so important because our kids are the future stewards of the planet. If they don't know that, if they don't know how to steward, if they don't love stewarding the planet, they're going to be lousy stewards. And we can't afford any more lousy stewardship. And maybe they'll learn how to hunt lizards. I'm learning this from my own granddaughter, Zoe, who lives in Hawaii on a very modest patch of nature. It's a little bit of lawn and a hedge, but there are no lizards there. And when she discovered that, she sent me this picture to describe how you hunt lizards. You get on the ground, and you cover yourself with leaves and sticks so the lizards don't see you coming. And you crawl slowly towards the lizard. No smiling. This is serious business. You wear your best dress, but you sneak up on the lizard, you catch the lizard, you put it in an aquarium, you learn how to take care of the lizard, hopefully before the lizard dies. You fall in love with the lizard. You fall in love with that part of nature. You start to care about it. I don't think Zoe's going to be crawling on the ground the rest of her life in her best dress catching lizards. But I guarantee she's going to remember doing that. I also guarantee she's going to be a good steward of the planet because of that simple little experience in her yard. If you want your kids to do more than catch lizards, get Nancy Strinisty's Nature Play at Home. Dozens of examples of how to expose kids to the natural world right where they live. And if you want to join Homegrown National Park, you can do it. Go to homegrownnationalpark.org and register your property. It's free. You just follow the directions for putting in where you live and the amount of area you're going to be a good steward of. If you're cutting your lawn in half, that's great. Even if you're just planting to, that's great. You know, maybe you planted a big oak tree, maybe you planted a little oak tree, and it's going to be big. You put all of that on the map, and then your little piece of your county is going to light up. You'll get to see who other people around you who have joined Homegrown National Park. The object is to use this as a piece of social media to get the message that everybody, not just the tree huggers who are here tonight, but everybody is responsible for good earth stewardship, and they don't know it. So get that message to go viral. We want them to join Homegrown National Park just because everybody else is joining. We'll get to see the whole map light up. It'll be great. People keep saying, are you using our data? What does that mean? No, we're not using your data. Okay, we're going to shrink the lawn. What plants should we put in the area that is now lost? I'm arguing that some of those have to be what I'm calling keystone plants. Remember what a keystone is. That's the Roman arch The keystone is the stone in the middle of the arch. And if you take that stone out of the arch collapses. Well, if you take keystone plants out of your local food web, the food web collapses because they're making most of the food. Just 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food that drives those food webs. So think of the keystone plants in your yard as the 2x4s that are holding up the ecological house you're building. They are essential. Your house is not going to stand up without them. We've been trying to build ecological houses out of wallpaper for the last year. That doesn't work. You're not through building your ecological house after your keystone plants are there, but it's a necessary start. So the question is no longer simply, are natives better than non-natives? On average, they certainly are, but there's a lot of natives that don't do all that much either. So the question really is, do we want to put the biggest contributors, the ones that are supporting the most specialist bees, the most caterpillars, in our yards, or not? What is the best plant genus for supporting the best keystone plant? In 84% of the counties in North America in which it occurs, it's one of the oaks, genus Quercus. 557 species of caterpillars supported in the mid-Atlantic states, over 950 species nationwide. There's no other plant genus that comes close to that. Oops. So how do you find out what the best keystone plants are where you live? You go to Native Plant Finder in the National Wildlife Federation website, put in your zip code, and the ranked list of both the woody and herbaceous plants that are best at supporting life in your county will pop up. So you've got five insects. Moths and butterflies you're going to key in on tonight. Many of those are supported right up here in these top herbaceous plants. So, there used to be a big excuse. I don't know what to plant. Now you do know what to plant. All right, we're going to shrink the lawn. We're going to put in keystone plants. We're going to invite a lot of insects to our yard, and then we're going to kill them with our security light. And of course, that's not the goal. There's a lot of research showing that light pollution is one of the major causes of insect declines. These are all the ways that lights are killing our insects, particularly the moths that create those caterpillars at night. But this is good news to me. We have got to stop insect decline. Stop it and reverse it. We've got to have insect increases. I want that to be the next headline. And if we can do that by flicking a switch, we're getting off easy. That's pretty easy to do. We've got a lot of switches to flick, but we can do that. But I know what you're going to say. I cannot turn the light out over my barn, or I cannot turn it over my garage or my front porch because the bad man will come. All right, put a motion sensor on it so it only turns on when the bad man does come. And the first thing you're going to notice is the bad man doesn't come very often. And if you don't want to do that, take the white bulb out of your security light and put in a yellow bulb. A yellow LED bulb is the best, because yellow wavelengths are far less attractive to nocturnal insects than our white wavelengths. If we switched out the white bulbs for yellow bulbs on our outdoor lights, overnight we would save millions of insects. And if we use LEDs, millions of dollars as well. Anybody who has a mercury vapor bulb up on a big post, that's the absolute worst. We're going to shrink the lawn. We're going to put in keystone plants. We're going to turn out our lights. Then we're going to invite Mosquito Joe to come kill all our insects. This is a booming business around the country. Mosquito Joe is single-handedly undoing everything that I've been talking about for the last 20 years. And he says it's okay. It's a natural product. And it is. It's a natural product. Pyrethroids, same compound found in chrysanthemums. It's industrial strength, pyrethroids, but cyanide is a natural product too. So I don't think that's a good argument. He also says it only kills mosquitoes. And boy, I wish he was right. But he's not. It kills all the insects it comes in contact with. And look, it comes in contact with everything that's there, including the beloved monarch. Not this fall, but 2 years ago, there were big headlines of big monarch kills hundreds of dead monarchs on the ground, flew through Mosquito Joe. The interesting thing is it doesn't control mosquitoes. You don't control mosquitoes in the adult stage. It's too hard. You have to kill 90% of the adults to get good control. Mosquito Joe kills between 10 and 50%. So he's not even close to actually being functional, which means he has to keep coming back and you have to keep paying him. If you really want to control mosquitoes, you do it in the larval stage. Get a bucket, fill it full of water, put in a handful of straw or hay, and let it ferment for a couple of days in the sun. It'll build up populations of algae and diatoms. That's what mosquito larvae eat. So that becomes a really attractive brood to any female mosquito that's going to lay her eggs. She'll lay her eggs in your bucket. Then you go to the hardware store and you get a sheet of mosquito dunks, $9. Put in a mosquito dunk. That's Bacillus Thuringientis, a formulation that only kills aquatic diptera. And the only aquatic diptera in your bucket is mosquito larvae. It's extremely targeted. So if a dragonfly gets in there, it doesn't hurt it at all. If your dog drinks it or your child drinks it, it doesn't hurt it at all. So it only kills mosquitoes. It's cheap, it's targeted. If everybody did it, it would be very effective. You might put a coarse screen over your bucket so your chipmunk doesn't jump in and drown, because they do like to do that. All right, the fourth thing we need to do is to landscape in a way that allows those caterpillars to complete their development. What do I mean by that? This is just an example. I live in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where oaks support 511 species of caterpillars. A few of them, like the polyphemus moth, complete their development on the tree. Well, caterpillar eats the leaves, it spins a cocoon and hangs from a branch, it emerges as an adult, and then it does it all over again. And I wish everything did that, but most species don't. Most species finish growing as caterpillars on the tree, and then they drop from the tree. And they wiggle their way underneath the ground and pupate underground, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that's under the tree, and that's the problem. There is no leaf litter under the tree. We don't tolerate it. We mow and compact the soil so it's rock hard, so the caterpillars can't get underground. So I think, the typical way that we landscape, I am predicting, is another major cause of insect declines around the country. It becomes an ecological trap. Moths will come in, lay their eggs here, the caterpillars develop and drop down and die. And of course, the cement landscape is not the solution either. This is what most people do. They have a big tree in a yard. We're going to measure what happens to caterpillars in a situation like that starting this summer, but I guarantee they're going to do better in a situation like this where you have a layered landscape. You've got a tree, you've got maybe a dogwood, and then a native azalea, ferns, and ground cover. Soft landing. The caterpillar falls down. The ground is not compacted. It can easily get underground and pupate. Lots of leaf litter down there. They can spin a cocoon. Much higher survivorship. This is where you can do your fancy spring ephemeral gardening. This is how you shrink the lawn. You put big beds around your trees. Then you have less lawn. All safe sites. Use your native ground covers, things like wild ginger, May apples, foam flower, ferns, all wonderful soft sites for those caterpillars. Okay, another former grad student, Desiree Narango, did some great work with chickadees in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and one of the results of her results is that turns out there's room for compromise in our plant choices. She had one simple question. She went into suburban yards, put up chickadee boxes, and said, how well do chickadee populations do over time when the landscape is dominated by native plants versus being dominated by typical introduced non-native plants? When they're dominated by non-native plants, they produce 75% fewer caterpillars. So right away, you reduce the amount of bird food by 75%. Those landscapes were 60% less likely to have breeding chickadees at all. The birds would come, look around, say, there's not enough food here, we're not even going to try. If they did try, they laid 1.5 fewer eggs. Those clutches were 29% less likely to survive at all. If they did survive, they produced 1.2 fewer fledglings, and it took them 1.5 days longer to do that. And if you put all that information into a population growth model as a function of the percentage of non-native woody plant biomass in your yard, from none to 100%, this is what you get. The dotted line is replacement rate. That's the rate at which the population has to make babies to replace the adults that die every year. If you reproduce at that rate, you have a sustainable population. It's not growing, but it's not shrinking either. If you make more babies than adults die, anything above the line there, you've got a growing population. But if you make fewer babies below the line there, you've got a shrinking, unsustainable population. Right here is where those lines overlap, generously speaking. So it suggests you can have up to 30% of your landscape non-native woody plant biomass without destroying the local food web. And we look at woody plants because that's where chickadees forage. So that's exciting to me. That's the area of compromise. If my message was we can't have any non-native plants, very few people would listen. But now you can't have any invasive plants. So no burning bush, no calorie pear. But look, here's Dan Getman's yard again. That's a ginkgo. I don't know if you picked that up the first time. Why does he have a ginkgo in his native plant landscape? Because his wife wanted a ginkgo. and Dan's a nice guy. So we put it again. Is that destroying the functionality of this landscape? No. There's your statue right there. It's not contributing, but it's not detracting that much either. It's not going to spread. It's not going to ruin the natural areas. So it's not the presence of non-native plants that destroys food webs. It's the absence of those native contributors. If we increase the percentage of them, we can tolerate some of the non-natives. Can we use natives in formal designs? Of course we can. This is a Lynn O'Shaughnessy design, sent it to me last year. You don't get more formal than that. That's taken by a drone 400 feet up. It's a large garden, and every plant in that garden is a native plant. So formality is a function of the design. It's not a function of the plants in the design. Our native plants are used in formal designs in Europe all the time. But I guess it's okay because they're non-native plants over there. Can we get a pollinator garden into a typical yard like this without offending anybody? Of course, just put a fence around it. It formalizes it. It tells people that's not just a bunch of weeds you forgot to mow. It's pretty when it's in bloom. It's meeting the needs of a number of species of bees. It's not very big. It could be bigger. But if everybody did it, it would help pollinators a lot. Remember why we need to help pollinators. You know, the media tells you it's because they pollinate a third of our crops. It's actually about a 12th of our crops. And people say, well, I don't live next to a farm, so I don't need any pollinators. Forget the farm argument. We need pollinators because they pollinate 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. If we lost our pollinators, we would lose 80 to 90% of the plants on the planet. That is not an option. So where do we need pollinators? Everywhere we need plants, whether it's near a farm or not. And that, by the way, is everywhere. How about this? That's a Drew Latham design, much bigger. Measure the amount of life supported here versus the amount of life supported here. Seems like a no-brainer. Can municipalities help us live with nature? Yes, they can, and a lot of them are doing it. There is a label up there. Minnesota kicked it off with a lawn to legume program. It's a cost-sharing program where the state is paying residents to reduce or replace their lawn with appropriate Minnesota prairie plants. It's very popular. Florida, there's an island off of Florida that's paying residents to allow burrowing owls, listed species, to burrow in the front yard. I think this is the way the Endangered Species Act should have been written, with carrots rather than sticks. If you have an endangered species on your property, we're going to pay you to take care of it, rather than fine you if you use your property. Everybody would run an endangered species. Put a bounty on invasive plants like cattle repair. That's what St. Louis, Missouri did, Fayetteville, Arkansas, South Carolina has banned them all together, North Carolina has bounty on it. Take out a cattle repair, you get a free tree replacement. Wow. And utilities are giving people $100 coupons to plant water-efficient native plants rather than the thirsty non-natives. And of course, the big lawn replacement programs in California, that's going up. You get $3 per square foot of lawn that you remove and replace with xeric plantings. California doesn't have one drop of water to waste on lawn. And they're finally recognizing that. Okay, I think we made 3 missteps in the early years of conservation, and the first one's a serious one. We've started to think of nature as if it's optional. We like it, we like to visit it, but it's not essential. And of course, if it's not essential, when push comes to shove, when resources are in short supply, nature takes a back seat. And resources are always in short supply. I went to the Cincinnati Zoo before the virus broke out, and there's this wall-sized poster there, which to me epitomizes our society's view of conservation. We want to save wildlife, save nature, so the future generations can enjoy it. That was Teddy Roosevelt's argument for creating the national park system. They're wonderful places. We want to save them so the future generations can enjoy it. And I get that. Nature is enormously entertaining, but it's much more important than that. We need to save nature so that we have future generations. Yeah. We're not going to be on this planet without it. Second problem we've had is we've assumed that humans and nature cannot coexist. Now, we talked about that, but if we restrict conservation efforts just to areas where there's not a lot of humans, we're going to fail, because there's not enough of those areas around anymore. David Quammen has a wonderful analogy between a Persian rug and an ecosystem. That is a functional Persian rug. That's not 71 Persian rugs. That's 71 rug fragments, none of which are acting like a Persian rug, and that's our ecosystems. The UN designates biosphere reserves as places of ecological significance. I don't like that language because it suggests there are places on planet Earth with no ecological significance. Not so. Every square inch of the planet has ecological significance, including our yards, including our corporate landscapes, including our roadsides, even including our agriculture. So we need to glue our rug back together again, folks. We need to put the plants back, not just to make biological corridors that allow plants and animals to move back and forth between viable habitats, but to create viable habitats where we've already destroyed them. Recreate them by putting the plants back. And when we do that, it'll be the first time in modern history that we have coexisted with the natural world. This is the visualization of Homegrown National Park, right there. Our third misstep is to leave Earth stewardship to just a few specialists, a few conservation biologists, a few ecologists. For some reason, we didn't see it as an inherent responsibility of everybody on the planet. But I don't know why. Because everybody on the planet, everybody, depends entirely on the quality of Earth's ecosystem. So why wouldn't everybody have the responsibility of taking care of those ecosystems? Stan Rushworth, the Cherokee elder, once said, the Western settler mindset was, I have rights. The mindset of indigenous people is, I have obligations. You're not born with those mindsets, you are taught them. We're very good at teaching this one. We've been terrible at teaching our kids and our peers that everybody has obligations to good Earth stewardship. It doesn't mean you have to save biodiversity for a living, but you can save it where you live. And if you do, it empowers you. You know, right now, so many people feel absolutely powerless, and I don't blame them. The Earth's problems are huge. And so what can one person do? Well, one person can shrink the lawn. One person can use Keystone Plants. One person can fire Mosquito Joe. One person can turn out their lights. One person can put in a pollinator garden. One person can, take out the invasive plants that are already on their property. We didn't even talk about that. One person can totally revitalize the little ecosystem where they live, enhance their greater local ecosystem. And it also shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire planet's problems. You get depressed. Just worry about the piece of the planet that you can influence. If you own property, that's obvious. That's where you start. If you don't own property, help somebody who does. Help a land conservancy. Help a park or a preserve. They're all underfunded. They're all understaffed. They will love you as a volunteer. So as a property owner or a volunteer, each one of us has the power. We certainly have the responsibility to fix dead landscapes like this. Whether or not we do so is going to determine nature's fate and then ultimately our own fate. I think I've convinced my grandchildren that you are nature's best hope. I hope I've convinced you as well. Thanks very much. Are we doing questions?
Yeah.
We're doing questions. Does anybody have any questions? Yesterday, I went out in my yard and I heard a little tick, tick, tick. I looked up, and here's a Baltimore Oriole hanging from a tent in my yard, poking holes in it, eating every one of those caterpillars. Wow. The Baltimore Oriole thinks they're good because they eat in an ugly way. But they're good native insects that do supply food, particularly as adults, to our food webs. We've lost our bats because of white nose disease, but also a lot of them fly around eating moths at night, and we don't have any moths at night in a lot of places. So, no more war on tent caterpillars. Yes?
It seems like, I don't know, I've just noticed it in the last 2 years, I don't have to wash my windshield anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Go to the gas station and use the little thing to clean your windshield.
Right.
Windshields never get dirty at night.
They sell the plastic screens for your grill.
Yeah, that's messed up.
Yeah, we don't have that problem anymore. Look at the street lights. Look at any street light. You don't see anything around it anymore.
Is it because of the mosquito spray?
Well, it's because of everything. The insect decline has been called death by 1,000 cuts. So we do all of these things, including reducing habitat. So they're all effective in reducing insect populations. But we're doing all of them, which means we can stop doing all of them. We can put it back together again. But one good thing about insects, there's many good things about it, is that they breed quickly. You can rebuild populations quickly if you stop poisoning them, if you stop murdering them, all that stuff. Yes, way back there. Do I have a source of information about mosquito Joe? I actually have several studies on my laptop I could send you if you send me an email. we at garden centers to stop selling the stuff we don't want them to sell? We stop buying it. We remove the market. These people are in business. They just want to sell plants. They want to sell seeds. They will sell what we want. If we say, if you don't carry this, I'm going away, and I'll find somebody who does. And if they hear that enough, they'll start to carry it. Right now, the market for native plants far exceeds the supply. So people are getting that. This is it's a business opportunity for a lot of people. And you know, the longtime horticulturists think it's a fad. You know, maintaining life on Earth, I hope it's not a fad. But I don't think it's going away. So if you're looking for something to do for the rest of your life, it's a good, not only that, but get into ecological gardening, ecological landscaping. Most people do not garden at all. They just want to hire somebody. So right now they hire the mow, blow, and go guys. Either retrain them or you become an ecological gardener. You say, I'm gonna plant your yard the way it ought to be. I'm gonna take care of it. And you're going to hire me, and they'll be very happy because they don't want to do it themselves. They don't have the knowledge, and they don't have the time. So that's another big empty niche out there. All the way back.
What are the top 3 oak trees you would recommend? Because there's so many.
Yeah, there are 91 species of oaks in the country. We have a number of species here. As you move a little farther south, it's a center of distribution for oaks in the U.S. Top 3. So you're implying that they're going to vary a lot in how good they are, and they don't. They're all really good. So up here, we don't have the live oaks, the ones that are evergreen. So we're in the red oak group and the white oak group. So white oak, swamp white oak, post oak, red oak, scarlet oak, pin oak, black oak, post oak, I said that. Chestnut oak, swamp chestnut oak. You know what? For small yards, people say, oh, the oaks are too big for my yard. Quercus crinoides, dwarf chestnut oak. They're all good. Yes?
Do you think that there needs to be more denser housing being built in the first place and less single-family homes so that there's less lawns in the first place? How do you think that would affect nature?
We're talking about cluster housing. On paper, that sounds great. Except when I look at how those natural areas that are left are maintained, it's not great. So you have a lot of houses here, and then you have a giant mowed field. Or you create a maintenance issue that has to be dealt with. So people say, well, I just won't mow it and it'll become a meadow, and it really just becomes an Elaeagnus patch, and Bradford pear. So it has to be maintained. In theory, it's a good idea, except we now do this everywhere, so it's not like we're actually preserving more land. We're just concentrating more and more people into smaller and smaller spaces. If it was maintained the way it was designed, it would be a good idea. I'm missing a point here. I wonder what it is. The big problem is the idea that we have to grow forever. We can grow as fast as the planet is growing, which is not very fast. I mean, this perpetual growth economy and the notion that we can increase our human population forever without any issues is nonsense. It's just, Newton told us that's not the way physics works. There are finite resources on this planet. We're already 3 times over the carrying capacity for this planet. That's why we're in the 6th great extinction. We've got so many humans taking so many resources. It's not left over for the nature that supports us. So we've got to put a halt on the growth everywhere and find. All right, I don't want you to get mad at me. Yes.
How would you suggest we help our corporate citizens develop better ecological management practices, particularly in those huge ecological dead zones that they're developing for warehouses and things like that, or distribution centers?
Right.
Save Abington Woods.
Yeah. It's all part of that perpetual growth model. We need more houses. What is an oak growth forest? It's not making us any money. If we valued ecosystem services, if we put $1 on it, if we charge them for the ecosystem services they just destroyed, and measure it accurately, it'd be a whole lot cheaper to keep the forest where it is and find a different place for their warehouse. But we don't. We don't value clean water. We don't value clean air, and we certainly don't value what nature is doing for us. Not in a monetary way. When people do calculate it, and a couple big studies have been done, it's in the trillions of dollars. So, money talks. You've got to use money to convince people. If you just say it's the right thing to do and we love nature, it doesn't get very far, even though we do. Somebody over here. Nobody? Yes. No, hit right next to you. You already had your time.
Yeah, sorry. Not a question, a comment. Just for everybody's awareness. Last year, Maryland passed a law that compels homeowners associations and other organizations to allow low-impact landscaping, such as rain gardens, native plant gardens, and pollinator gardens. The HOA cannot tell you can't do it in Maryland.
Right, and I believe Maryland is the first state to do that. I think you're a leader in that regard. I haven't heard of any other examples. And I use that. I tell other states, do what Maryland did. Can we take one more question? Yes.
Were you saying that a water element is an essential feature?
Moving water that gurgles and bubbles is really attractive to birds, particularly migrating birds, because they've flown all night, they're thirsty, and if you want to see a lot of birds in your yard, it's a good thing to add. And they like moving water because it's a signal that it's clean. So the old bird bath that just sits there and turns green, they don't like that. They want a little bubbler type thing, and then it's a magnet to them. So yes, it's not that they can't find water someplace else, but they will go someplace else and not be in your yard. So if you want to see them, it's a good thing to add. Thanks very much.
I think another round of applause for Dr. Tallamy. Thank you so much. I did see a couple of people still had their hands up, and we're going to try to stick to our agenda. So Dr. Tallamy will be selling books at the end of the talk tonight. We have about another half hour left. And please ask him some more questions afterwards. He'll be here. And I just want to point out that we're going to talk for a couple of minutes about the Bel Air 5. And then after that, we have some awards that we're going to give out. And also, we'll announce our raffle prize and gift winners. So stick around. And now, I'm going to welcome back Mayor Bianca. And he and I are going to talk about Bel Air 5. Woohoo! Woohoo!
So Tracy, where did you get this wonderful idea for the Bel Air 5?
Well, I think everybody can see where we got this idea. It was from Doug Tallamy. Harford County Climate Action did a book discussion group on the books Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Best Hope. And one idea that really stood out to me is that even if we preserve all the remaining undeveloped land, it won't be enough to stop the species losses we're seeing now. But what would give us a chance is if we restore native plants and trees like the oak tree to our suburban yards. And we all thought, why not give this a try and get the whole town of Bel Air involved in doing this?
All right, Tracy, so what exactly is the Bel Air 5? Are they a gang of ruthless criminals awaiting trial in our local courthouse?
Well, actually, they're just butterflies and a moth. We're targeting 5 insects that we hope to see their numbers increase. These are 4 butterflies: the monarch, the silvery checker spot, the spice bush swallowtail, and the great spangled fritillary, plus 1 moth, the unicorn caterpillar moth.
As a very smart man once told me, Mr. Doug Tallamy, there are hundreds of butterflies. Why did you pick these 5?
Well, we picked local butterflies that need our help. The butterflies we picked are not so rare that we won't have any hope of ever seeing them, because some butterflies are extirpated. That means they haven't been seen, even though they're native, they haven't been seen in this area for decades. Since the help we'll be providing to them is to plant the unique native plants on which they lay their eggs, we wanted to find insects that had beautiful host plants that we thought people would want to have in their gardens. We picked the unicorn caterpillar moth because it has such a cool looking caterpillar. Now, looking at Dr. Tallamy's slides, a lot of caterpillars are very cool looking, but we just thought this would be a nice caterpillar that children would enjoy searching for in our backyards.
So all these beautiful people here tonight want to know, what is the first step they can do? They're ready for action. What can they do first?
Anyone can take the first step in this project right now. Just get out your smartphone, go to your app store, and search for the iNaturalist app. This is a free app that is created by the National Geographic Society and the California Academy of Sciences. It connects people to nature through sharing photos of biodiversity and crowdsourcing identifications. That just means that once you upload your photo, you will get an email from someone or a notification on the app from an expert saying that they either agree or disagree with your identification. And once you agree, that information gets uploaded to the Maryland Biodiversity Project database.
That sounds so easy, Tracy. Is that it? Is that all we have to do?
Well, Mayor, the next step is to plant the host plants for our 4 butterflies and a moth. Butterflies and moths lay their eggs on only a few types of plants called the host plant. And so a host plant is what the caterpillars eat, and the pollinator plants are what the adult butterfly uses to get its pollen. So we're going to be having, there's a garden mart. The Bel Air Garden Mart is held here at the Armory annually, and it's going to be held not this Friday, but next Friday from 8:30 until 1:30. And we've been offered, Harford County Climate Action has been offered a table at that event, and we're going to have all of the host plants for the Bel Air 5 available for sale at that event. And if we don't sell out, then Kohler's Nursery has offered to sell remaining plants at the farmer's market in Bel Air the next day, which is the 21st of May. And then later, host plants are going to be available at Herring Run Nursery, at the Mill, and at Kohler Nursery. And there are other nurseries that'll have 1 or 2 maybe, but those nurseries have agreed to really try to carry as many of the Bel Air 5 host plants as they possibly can.
That's right. We better see you all back here on May 20th for the garden march here. All right, Tracy. So I've got the iNaturalist app, and me and my kids, we planted all the host plants. It was a long ordeal with my kids. It took forever, but we've got the pollinator plants, and we're native to this area. What else can we do?
Well, of course, you want to take good care of your Bel Air 5 plants the first year. But as native plants, they should come back and be pretty self-sustaining the next year. And then keep your eye on plants. Check for butterfly eggs and caterpillars and butterflies. Take a photo of anything you see and upload the pictures to iNaturalist. once we have that information uploaded to the Maryland Biodiversity Project database, we'll be able to use that data to see if we are actually making a difference in butterfly populations here in Bel Air. Harford County Climate Action planted milkweed plants at a pollinator garden that the town offered us behind Rockfield Manor last year. That same year, we had monarch caterpillars all over those plants. It was super exciting. I wanted to sit by the garden and protect those caterpillars. But, as we saw from Dr. Tallamy, if birds do eat them, that's also a wonderful thing. Thank you.
Well, this is very exciting. This is something that anybody can do. I know that my family and I, as Mr. Chalmers talked about getting the young generation involved, we go on nature walks to see what we can find out there in the neighborhood. I'm just still hoping not to see a spider anywhere I go, but that's okay. Here tonight, we're learning about insects. We're okay. See, change is possible. I'm a whole new man. But I can see people walking around outdoors with their cell phones and magnifying glasses looking for eggs and caterpillars. Is that what you hope to see out of this?
That's exactly what we hope to see. The people who plant these host plants, the more people who engage in this, the more this plan will work. And the more people who join the Homegrown National Park project, Dr. Tallamy's project, the bigger all of this will become. So talk to your neighbors about it and see if you can get them to help. We take from nature every day. Being in nature helps our mental and physical health. The natural world provides all of our food. The gifts go on and on. I think it's long overdue for us to give some thought to how we can give back to nature. Maybe the Bel Air 5 project will be a way for us to start to give back. Thank you. Thank you so much. Group of the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club. Yay, nice. The Gunpowder River Keeper was here tonight. Bill Tennant was representing the Gunpowder River Keeper. The Miss Bianca from the town of Bel Air, representing the Appearance and Beautification Committee and the Tree Committee and the town, and also Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake. And Interfaith Partners has an event that's coming up too, and so we're going to have a quick announcement about an event that's coming up.
Damn heels. Okay. Did you know, good people, that Harford County has a festival celebrating care and creation in Harford County? Because we have some beautiful landscapes, do we not? Yeah. Yes. So Interfaith Partners, yes. Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake hosts this fair. It rotates around Harford County. This year it is in Street, Maryland. It has a lot of good activities. Not only, I mean, it's for everyone. Not only is it for you, but it's also for the kids too, because as we heard tonight, they too are our next stewards of this earth. So come and join. There's a lot of free activities, face painting, critters, eco vendors, just to get yourself acquainted with others who are like-minded in social justice here with the environment. Join us, it's free, please register.
I want to also thank the Chesapeake Bay Trust for awarding us a community engagement grant, which paid for most of tonight's expenses. And thanks to our partners, the town of Bel Air, Harford County Public Library, the Greater Baltimore Group of the Sierra Club, and members of Harford County Climate Action. Do you all want to stand up or wave? Everyone is here from Harford County Climate coming up, please?